Over the last few years, the Department of Meteorology and Atmospheric Science has welcomed several new faculty members. And right now we're taking some time to introduce them to you. Tonight we check in with Dr. Laifang Li, who joined the department early in 2020. Thanks for visiting with us, Laifang, and welcome to Weather World.
Thank you, John.
Now, your BS degree is in oceanography. Then you got your PhD in climate dynamics from Duke. Where did your interest in the oceans and climate come from?
That's a great question. So I started to get interested in oceanography when I was a middle school student, where I got a chance to get accepted to a summer camp about oceanography. So during the summer camp, I was able to travel to a coastal city and actually to view that how the ocean tide is utilized by people to generate electricity. So at that moment, ocean in my mind is never an object that is big and deep, but it becomes something powerful. And that powerfulness of the ocean also empowered me to get very interested in oceanography. And I determined to study oceanography as my future career at that.
Very interesting. Now, you spent several years at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in Massachusetts. What was that experience like?
That's a great experience. As you know, Woods Oceanographic Institution is a top institution in oceanography. Every oceanographer dreams to become a part of that institution, get some research experience. So I treat that as an honor in my career towards ocean and climate research. So I think the institution emphasizes a lot in physical or magnetic interpretation of how ocean works and its role in the climate. So it really shaped my way of thinking about the climate system. And that's why that experience brought me from there to our department.
Right. And I know you've only been at Penn State for about a year and a half, so you haven't taught many classes yet, but which classes do you anticipate will become your favorites, or, the ones you'd like to teach most frequently?
That's a great question. I really enjoy teaching at Penn State, although only 2 semesters. So that being said, both classes I have taught so far are my favorite. But if I have to pick one, I'll just choose the hydrometeorology class, which I developed and taught in the past semester. So it's about the water movement in the climate system, and it links the atmospheric dynamics, climate dynamics, and ocean circulation, all these components to the big picture of the water science. So far, that's my favorite.
Yeah, and I mean, with oceans covering, 70% of the globe, we know where most of the water ends up coming from that falls from the sky. And speaking of that, let's spend the rest of the time talking about some of your research. I took a look at some of the papers you've written recently, and one topic that comes up a few times is the so-called cold blob in the North Atlantic Ocean. What is that, and what makes it an important phenomenon to understand?
That's a great question. So cold blob, it refers to the subpolar North Atlantic, where in the past century, we observe a temperature decrease as opposed to a warming trend or temperature everywhere else. So that's really an outlier phenomenon in the ocean, right? And it tells us that this patch of the ocean is behave differently than other places in terms of heat uptake, its role in the energy balance in the Earth system. So that's a very interesting phenomenon to us to address. And we already know it has a big impact on climate in the Europe, weather pattern, and even the precipitation of the Indian Ocean region. So it has a far-reaching impact, but its mechanism has not yet been fully understood.
Got it. And what are some other interesting ocean-related research problems you're working on now?
So in addition to this cold blob, we are also got very interested in the extreme warming events over the ocean. So in certain other patch of the ocean, sea surface temperature is warming up, and we observe some extreme warm case at yearly basis. So we call this case marine heat wave events, which is an analog to the heat wave events on land. And my group is studying the formation mechanism and what maintains its intensity and duration, and what are the downstream impact of these marine heat waves on climate over the land.
Okay.
And we are also looking at the ocean as a moisture source. So studying the moisture export from the ocean to land, and how this oceanic moisture input is going to shape the spatial and temporal distribution of precipitation, which has more direct impact to our daily life.
Yeah, and we have about a minute left. I also noticed some of your work involves salinity problems in the ocean. Could you just comment briefly about that?
Yeah, sure. So as the moisture leaves the ocean, it leaves the salt behind. So that's why people call the sea surface salinity a nature's rain gauge, which document these moisture export events over the ocean. So we are utilizing this oceanic signature of the water cycle to predict the precipitation events on land. And we are still exploring the feasibility and the physical mechanisms behind.
Well, thanks very much, Laifang. Dr. Laifang Li, one of my new colleagues in the Department of Meteorology and Atmospheric Science at Penn State. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us.
Thank you, John. Very happy to be here.
And we will be back in a moment with a recap of the short range forecast.